So I guess I will start in, and I'm going to share my screen. And I am hoping that when I do so, that you see one screen and one screen only, and that it's red and says something like Pressbooks. Okay, great.
That's what we see, Liz.
Fabulous. And I'm going to move the Zoom windows so they're not distracting. Okay, so I'm going to, when you come into the Pressbooks dashboard, there is an ASCCC instance, which presumably you would be granted access to. And then once you are logged into that, there are a couple different courses of action that you could take. But I'm going to start with the creating a book action, and that would be if you are going to start a book from scratch. Now, Pressbooks also has ways where you could remix something that already exists if it's appropriately licensed, and I'll get to that later in the call. But the first thing I'll show is just how to create a book. And so I go to create a book. And I'm going to work on this book privately. You could work on it publicly, it's up to you. And you can even make a book public and make individual chapters public and private. And that can be really helpful, for instance, if you are creating most of a textbook for use one semester and maybe you still want to work on a few chapters, they're not quite ready for your class yet. Or if you are releasing a book for one semester and then you know you're going to be making revisions and additions for the following semester, you can be working on a book while still having like a portion of the book live and stable for your students. So once Pressbooks creates the bookshell, I just go to the Organize dashboard. And if there's anyone here who has ever used WordPress, this should look pretty familiar. If you've created posts and pages in WordPress, this is very, very similar. In Pressbooks, we refer to things as parts, which are sort of larger buckets that the chapters sit within, but you can even change that verbiage to something that fits your use case. So maybe you're not creating, quote, a book, but maybe you're creating something that has sections or modules or units or something to that effect. And so you'll see each Pressbook shell comes with some pre-populated content that you could easily delete if you wanted to, or you could go into, for instance, chapter 1 and start writing. This visual editor, again, will look very similar to WordPress, and you would just type in what you want to type in here. What I usually tend to do when I'm doing a book or an open textbook is I set up my book to begin with. I structure it, maybe it's a 15-week course, so I have like 15 chapters. So then I start creating all my chapters. And then later I can rearrange them and I can add to them. And then I set goals for myself of, this week I'm going to do, this chapter. Next week I'll do this, or today, this morning is devoted to this. So you can edit, as I said, these parts to be whatever you'd like. And you can create more of them to divide your book into more sections. Maybe you have an intro class and an advanced class or something. That might be one use for that. Or broad themes throughout your book would be another use. So I've created a second part here, and then I can also drag and drop and or use the move down tool to drag and drop these chapters and move them around within my book. This is helpful if I later decide, oh, I think this concept actually belongs somewhere later in the book or earlier in the book, and that kind of a thing. A cool thing that you can do, and I'm going to move, one other thing you might want to do when you're first setting up your book, or maybe you do this as you go along, is just put your metadata in. And so you can get to the metadata screen under book info here. And you can change your title to whatever you would like it to be. You can add a short title or a subtitle. You can credit contributors here. You may be collaborating with multiple faculty. And even if they're not actually in Pressbooks with you, you can add a contributor to credit someone that is not working in Pressbooks. So I'm just going to call that person new faculty and just add them this way. I'm going to add them as a new contributor, and now when I am on the book info page, oh, you can see they came up here. Sorry about that. So now when I'm on the book info page, I can select that person as a contributor as well.
Liz, I got a question. Liz, I had a question privately in the chat from Otamaris. They asked, can you make a book private and have other collaborators? So I think this question was a little different from contributors, but can you collaborate with multiple authors in a book, I think was the question.
Yes, you can do that. Absolutely. And we encourage that. Pressbooks is great for collaborative projects. And in fact, I've used it for a couple projects. One of them is this media innovation and entrepreneurship open textbook, and we had more than 20 different collaborators, not even including the peer reviewers, just including the authors themselves. A guide to making open textbooks with students was also built in Pressbooks, and there were quite a few, I want to say more than 10 collaborators for this book as well.
I was one of those collaborators back when I worked at the University of Wisconsin, so that was fun. That's one of the boys I first met, Liz, actually.
Yes. And so yes, it's really easy to work with collaborators in Pressbooks. You can also credit all types of different contributors. So all of those collaborators may not be authors. They might be translators, peer reviewers, illustrators, other contributors not yet defined. You, of course, can indicate the publisher, which will depend on the scenario, who that is. It might be your university, it might be you, it might be the university press. You can determine that with the school resources. Things like the publication date. If you have an ISBN for any of the formats or a DOI, you can enter that here. You can upload your ebook cover and webbook cover here. Designate a catalog subject.
If you were to scroll up a little bit, I know that there's a lot of bilingual education or multilingual education that happens in California. We have a few people that teach in Spanish, so you can indicate the actual language of the book, and so the metadata and the display information will often be altered for the target language of the book.
Exactly. And this has been used to great effect in a book that Steele, I believe, was somewhat involved in, this Portuguese language textbook that was built out of Wisconsin-Madison. And we'll probably show some examples from this in a bit.
Sure.
Okay.
We ever published that was the very first press book I ever worked on. It was a Portuguese language textbook. It was fun.
And so finally in your metadata, you'll definitely want to indicate some sort of copyright license. Again, the copyright holder will depend on your scenario. It might be you, it might be the university, depending on whatever you have worked out with them. But here, this license is really important because this is going to tell Pressbooks whether a book created on a Pressbooks network can be cloned by another Pressbooks network. And this is something, of course, with OER that we want to encourage. We do support the full range of licenses from all rights reserved to public domain and all the Creative Commons licenses in between. But whatever you indicate here will tell Pressbooks technology, basically, how that content can be used. Does the license support certain activities like remixing and revising and redistributing, which Pressbooks will have the technical capability to facilitate down the road. So all of those things, you can make these choices here and press save, and then that will all be stored. When you are sort of done with, maybe you're midway done, or kind of wanting to make sure that the book looks the way you want, you can simply choose a theme, and all you have to do that is click activate. And then we also have theme options, which you can access usually with a checkbox or a drop down that will essentially make changes throughout the book universally without you having to change something on every page or reflow the text or anything like that. So Pressbooks really began as an easy way to format books in multiple formats, many different formats, all from a single source. And so you'll see there are options, there are different style sheets, and this surfaces the ways to change those in a user-friendly way. So things you might be able to change on all of the formats. Global options include things like colors for some of the example text boxes, or exercises or takeaways, different things like that. And for each of these choices, you'll want to save your changes. We also have things that are only changeable in the web book. PDF options. If you are doing print on demand, you may want to change the trim size, different things like that. You can change things like your running heads and your footers. You can decide what is an orphan, what's a widow. So you don't have to make these changes like on a page by page, minuscule basis. And then there are ebook options as well, the most important of which is probably compressing your images for the ebook stores if you choose to use them. And then when you're all ready, or even if you just want to preview, you would go to export and then just select the formats you want to preview. So you might choose PDF, you might choose any of these. These are some proprietary formats that are used by people using Pressbooks for the bookstores of various kinds or distributors. You might also use some of these more open formats like the XML or the HTML. We also have on the system that you have, you will see an option for common cartridge with web links. And that is something where if you wanted to link to the book from your LMS, you can do that with this tool right here. This other option won't actually be visible to you, but if you were on an institutional instance, like if your university had their own instance, it's possible they would have paid for the LTI integration, in which case you would also see this option, and that involves a very, very seamless LMS integration. So then when you're done with that, you would just click, let's say I want to export a PDF. I'm just going to export the book. I'll get a little progress bar here while it's doing that. And then what will happen is some downloads will show up here, and I can take those and do anything that I want with them. So I could give them to the students, I could put them in an archive, I could take them to print on demand, I can do anything I want. Pressbooks has no restrictions on what you do with the formats that you get from it. I also realized that I failed to actually sort of show you what the web book looks like in Pressbooks, and I think that's important as well. So here I'm showing you what we call a public web book. This particular book happens to be CC BY licensed, which is one of the most open of the Creative Commons licenses. And you'll see there's the title, the editors or authors, the description, the license shows up, different ways to access the table of contents here or here. You can click on, for instance, a chapter, and then you can click on the table of contents here or navigate this way. This web book, if it is mobile responsive, so if you've ever had students say, I really wish I could read the textbook on my cell phone when I'm in between things, well, with a Pressbook, they really can, and that's a nice benefit. But we also know that you may have students who need offline access to the book or some other modality for their particular scenario. And what PressbooksEDU, which is the type of instance I'm showing you here, will let you do is it will allow you to surface any exports that you would like of your book on the book homepage. And that means students can download these, anyone can download these. And that can be really convenient. For instance, maybe you've got a student who's going on an airplane and they want an EPUB for their e-reader. Maybe they want to print off a PDF for offline viewing, or just take it down to their laptop so that they don't have to be online. Maybe they want to print off a chapter of that. And then these other formats also allow people to remix it regardless of whether they might have their own Pressbooks instance. So it's a very open thing to do to surface these exports if you choose to do so. The next thing I'll show you is actually cloning. And so of course, when you're making OER, you want to make it useful to the ecosystem as well. Part of the benefit of licensing something in an open way, if you choose to do so, is that you're not just creating something that can only be used at your institution. You're hopefully creating something that will benefit faculty in your discipline across across the nation and even beyond. So all I need to do, if I have an instance of PressbooksEDU, to make a copy for remixing of an open textbook is put the URL of that textbook in here. And it does have to be a public textbook. It has to be licensed appropriately. And then it also has to be built on Pressbooks for this particular tool that I'm showing you here. And then I'm going to say clone of, and then I choose a URL for the new copy of the book. And then this will take a few minutes for the cloner to essentially create an editable version of this book, but then that editable version is going to look just like the the one that I showed you when we were creating a book from scratch. And anything on the original book that you might need for the revision is going to come over. So that includes things like images with the attributions from the original. They'll come over. If there were H5P exercises on the original, those will also come over. If there are trying to think of other things that you like, just attributions in general for the other authors that were on the original, they will come over as well.
Could you clone OpenStax?
Yeah, so OpenStax is a little harder. They're built on a different type of code, so it is not, you cannot directly use the cloning tool to clone an OpenStax book. And I will say it can be a little challenging to get OpenStax books in. At one point, one of our open source users had built a plugin that would sort of bring in OpenStax materials a little more easily, but they did still need a lot of cleanup. And one of the reasons we've been trying to build our own for a while, but one of the reasons that sort of a blockage to that is that these are enormous files. So some of those books are like 1,000-page books, and the zip files are so huge that the way we would need to enable them to come over is using those zip files, and they just crash. They're just too big for anything to handle. So we're still looking for something.
I will say in many cases there are already Pressbooks users in the community that have imported it, done the cleanup. Like it's a little bit of a messy process, but there are, in many cases, there is an already existing Pressbooks version of the OpenStax books, and those can be cloned. So the other day I was on Twitter and someone was asking, they were looking for like the physics book and the sociology book, and I was able to find copies of both of those on somebody's Pressbooks instance, and then we could clone those. It largely depends which book you're looking for. But
right.
Great
and
question.
often we can lead you to a Pressbooks version of that book. So I guess the cloning has succeeded while we were talking, and now if I click on this book, it will take me to that editable interface again of this new book. And there are a lot of settings in Pressbooks that are made on a per book basis. So you, as the author or the book creator, can decide things like, do I want to create H5P in a book? Do I want to turn on annotations on this book? Do I want this book to be public, or which parts of it do I want to be public? And so here we are, and you can see we have this editable version. And so you could do things like delete parts of a book. You could add chapters. You could go within a chapter and start editing the chapter. And as you can imagine, this is much easier than starting from scratch.
And Liz, if you want, I have a couple of examples that I can kind of show of how this process works and looks. So
sure.
I've got something ready to go here. I'll just, if you stop sharing your screen, I'll jump into mine and kind of give a little bit more of this. So here we've got an example, and this was a book that I was really pleased to see. There were some people, UMass Amherst, 3 instructors there, that built a really, oops, I made that too big. Sorry, I'm still new to Zoom. Okay, they built this great Introduction to Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies text. So I made a copy or a clone of that book, and the way that you know it's a copy or a clone is if we were to come down to the bottom, we would see all of this metadata, book information about the book. And because it's a clone, it will display this book was cloned from a source. Well, the original author, I think, is no longer making the book available, but while it was available, we were able to make a clone, and it had this license on it. So in a way, we're preserving some content that has gone away off the web, right? Now, I've got this book, and I really like it. There's a bunch of extra metadata, as Liz was saying down below. It was published by UMass Amherst Libraries. Here are the subjects. Here's the license. And I happen to know that there's a chapter in this book about sex, gender, and sexuality. And I have a video here about gender basics or gender spectrum or gender fluidity that I think would be nice at the end of this chapter. So I'm going to come to the bottom of the chapter. I've copied the YouTube link, and I click paste on a new line. I've just inserted a video that wasn't in the original book, but I'm making my remix and I'm improving it. So I've got a video here. Another thing I might want to do is to say, oh, they've defined these terms. Like, for example, heteronormative. I've got a definition for heteronormative. Pressbooks has a glossary tool, and I'd like to use that glossary tool here. So I'm going to select the word heteronormative, and I'm going to offer a glossary definition. So I'll say, okay, heteronormative, and I would say the belief that heterosexuality is the norm or default sexual orientation. That's a good definition. So I'm going to say insert. Pressbooks will now insert a little glossary term here. So now when I preview my chapter, I've just made my first edits or remix of an existing textbook. And here you'll see, oh look, I've got a glossary term so that when a student were to click on this word, they would see a definition pop up for them. And then at the bottom of the chapter, I've now got this YouTube video that helps explain the gender spectrum. And when I'm ready, I would then click Save, for example. Someone in the chat, just Otomars, just asked, is it legal to post a YouTube video on a book? Do we need to ask permission for that? The answer to that is yes, it is legal. So in this case, what we're doing is we're not actually copying the video. We're just posting an embedded link to the video. So as long as the YouTube video is public and remains up on YouTube, we're just putting a link or a reference to the video. If you wanted to provide additional attribution for the video, you of course could do that. But in this case, we're not copying, we're just posting a link to it. So that was a good question on Mars. So that's a little bit about, like, say, revising or editing. Do you want me to toss it back to you, Liz, or do you want me to show something else I've got in mind here?
Go ahead.
Okay, so another thing that we would also be able to do at this point would be, for this book, Liz was saying that we could make a series of exports. And once we've made exports, they'd be visible here. We can also set it up so that when you visit the book itself, the exports would be available as download files on the book's homepage. So if we're talking about really open content, anybody in the world that had internet access could visit this web book and read it, or they could download some offline version or offline copy and take it with them if they didn't have reliable internet access. In the cases where the PDF included media elements or other interactive components, the PDF will say there was an interactive component here, there'll be a placeholder, and it will give them a link to the web version because we can't put a video in a PDF. There's a couple other questions from chat. Do glossary terms export somehow for students not using digital version of the book? Yeah. So Jennifer, let me show you an example. Or Liz, do you have a better example of a more built out glossary in a book that you'd want to show?
Yes, actually. Let me share. Can you pop out?
Yeah, thanks. And then Josh, we'll get to your question in a little bit later.
Okay, I am going to share my screen. Here we are again. Okay, so this is a book that has some examples already built, and I will show you, I will get into the dashboard where I will show you that we have a number of glossary terms pre-populated in this particular book. Some of these are test demo terms, others of them are from a real open textbook. And you'll see there's just a bunch of these. So I want all of these to auto-populate into a glossary rather than me having to pull them all over individually, which would be quite painstaking. And so what I do is I go to, again, this organized dashboard, and I go to the back matter. And all I have to do to create an auto-populated glossary from these terms is just create an item. And I can call this anything that I happen to want, but I'm just going to call it glossary. And then I tell Pressbooks that this is a glossary as the back matter type, and press create. And then when you go to this chapter on the web, you'll see that it was blank in the visual editor, but now it has all of these different terms pre-populated. And that's one nice tool. Another nice aspect to the glossary is how easy it is to actually insert those terms inside the text. So I have a chapter here where that's set up. So here is a chapter just to show you that this is working. We have some glossary terms here and here. And if I go into this chapter to edit it, you'll see what that looks like. So Pressbooks essentially does this through a shortcode, but it's not hard to create that. So I'm going to delete this as though it didn't exist and create it from scratch. And all I have to do is highlight the term, click GL, and then I could either create and insert a term from scratch here, which would also go into that list of terms, or I could choose an existing term. And in this case, one exists, so I'll do that. And then I insert it, and some shortcode is created around there, which I can save.
Liz, we had another question from Irma in the chat. They asked, back to book organization, after creating a chapter, how do you add pages to break down the sections?
Okay. So
I think maybe showing parts and chapters a little bit,
Irma,
or
do you
even
mean
sections.
parts and chapters, or do you mean subsections of a chapter?
I am so sorry. It's how do you break down the chapter into pages or subsections of the chapter? So the page doesn't run really, really long.
So there's a couple ways to do that. I always cheat, and what I do is I just create multiple chapters for things like that. But there's a piece of code, and I can send it to you. I don't know it offhand, but it's like it's like 3 characters of code that will allow you to break up a chapter that way and have it advance to the next. So it's not a long wall of text that students are reading.
There's a little button you can do from the WYSIWYG, but there's also, maybe I'll show a couple other things, Liz,
Sure.
if you want, that
the
people can do with this. We went a little off script, but that's totally fine. It was a great question. Okay, so I am in, let's go back to that gender and sexuality book because it's got a lot of content. So if I were in this book, there's a couple of things that I could do. Let's say I have, these tend to be small chapters anyway, but we're looking at a long case study. One thing that I could do would be I could insert a heading element. So I'll call this heading 1, and then maybe down here I'd say heading 2, or like this would be, I call it a subsection, or like 2.1, whatever you'd like to call it. You can enter any number of these. So let's say I've made 3 headings in this book. So I can do 2 different things here. I'll show you them one at a time. One is in theme options, I can turn on a 2-level table of contents. So if I have very long chapters, but I want people to be able to jump to the sections, if I turn this setting on and click Save Changes, now when I go to visit my book, I'll have to wait for just a second for that to process. Where was the chapter I was in? It was the case study one. You'll notice here in this case study, the table of contents will expand and you'll see each of my headings as clickable links. I can jump directly to that in the book. And you'll see, oh, there I am at the heading. And if I went to the table of contents here again, I could say, oh, let's jump to heading 3. So that's one way to break the book up into sections. If you feel like that's still too much scrolling, you can also come back into the web options and you can say collapse the sections. And what this will do, you'll see in just a second, it'll make it so that all of those headings begin as collapsed sections with little plus minus buttons next to them. So here when I reload this, you'll now see this chapter. It doesn't look very big anymore. It just looks like, okay, I'm ready to read section 1. And now I'm ready to read section 2. So those are 2 different ways that you can do that. You can do one or the other or neither. Liz also mentioned that you can break your chapters down into smaller things. And in the editor, I think I remember where this is at, but it's been a little while. Let me jump back into the editor. Let's see, there's like somewhere there's like a read more button. I don't remember where it's at. Insert read more, okay. I think you do this and you click the read more tag, and then when you preview it, maybe the preview doesn't work, but it's in our guide. We'd look it up and we can send a follow-up email, but it lets you kind of break it into a page, as Liz said, and then do something else with it. That was a question I wasn't quite prepared for, and it showed in my demo. Josh also asked a question earlier, Liz, about showing the thin common cartridge exports, how it works within LMS. I mentioned in my response that there are 2 methods. There's the LTI method that's a bit more of a seamless integration. That's not going to be present on your demo instance, but the common cartridge with web links will. If you want, we could show that real quickly with the Canvas example. Is that an okay time to do that now, Liz? Or do you want to
go ahead.
Later? Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's jump back into, here's my book, the Gender, Women, Sexuality book. I'm going to come to the export option, and I'm just going to make a simple common cartridge with web links. So what this will do is it's going to make one single zip file for me, and I can take that zip file and I can bring it into an LMS. In this particular case, I'm going to use Canvas because it's what I have access to. I'm not sure what LMSs everyone's using, but any LMS that would support an IMS global standard, so Moodle, Sakai, Blackboard, D2L, Canvas, this will work more or less the same in those. So let me come to a Pressbooks book that or a course that I created. All right, I've got a sample book here. Canvas is the default. Okay, thanks, Josh. That makes it really easy. So you're going to see basically the same thing here. Let me just go ahead and blow up this course and reset it. Michelle, all right. Good. Okay, so when I'm ready, I would come to import course content in Canvas. It's going to say, what kind of content do I want to import? I actually have a common cartridge package, so I'm going to say that's the one I want. Here's the file that I downloaded, and I'll say all content and import. Now what's happening here is Canvas has taken this one zip file. It's going to open up the zip file, and the zip file is going to consist of a bunch of different links to live Pressbooks chapters. So this is completed, and now if I go to my book, you'll see in modules, every one of the sections in Pressbook has been created as a module, and every one of the chapters has been created as a link. Because we're not using LTI, when I click the link, what you'll see is it's loading as external content that looks kind of the way it looks. If we were to do this via LTI, this whole frame would be gone, and you would just see it as though it were native to Canvas. So that's the difference between LTI and non-LTI. But even this is, you know, that's helpful to have the content there, even with this frame. And if I were to click this, it would load it as an external link in the live webbook. So that's the major difference. Converting a Canvas course to Pressbooks. Okay, Aloha, that's a great question. So let me ask, so for the Canvas course to Pressbooks, yeah, you could copy paste your module pages into Pressbooks pages. I believe you could also, I think Canvas supports an EPUB export. So if you made the EPUB export, at Pressbooks we support EPUB imports. So let me show you, actually, let me show you that real quickly. That bleeds into another thing. Let me come to an empty book. Liz, is this okay? I'm a little going off script here.
Yeah, sure.
All right. So here I'm in an empty book. And we're going to come to Tools, and we're going to come to Import. So earlier today, because I was going to talk to a bunch of Californians, I went to Project Gutenberg and I downloaded the public domain copy of John Muir's book about the Yosemite. John Muir is nice because he has a Wisconsin connection and a California connection. So he speaks to both of us, hopefully. But we'll see. Okay, I've got this EPUB. I downloaded it and I put it on my desktop in demo files. Okay. So I'm picking an EPUB file, and oh, my Wi-Fi died. Okay, here I am. I've got the book here, and I'm going to say import this selection. And so it's going to run through this, and it's going to bring this now into my book. You'll see I now have a bunch of chapters of John Muir's book, Yosemite. And so in this case, chapter 2 is called Winter Storms and Spring Floods. So let's change that. And I've just imported the EPUB, and it's an editable document here in Pressbooks. The second thing that I could do then is I could also say, if I have content in other types of formats, so let's say I have a Word document. I have a Word document on my computer that's already been kind of prepared. It has some short codes and other stuff to kind of show off, but I'm going to say begin this import. This Word document, Pressbooks is parsing that Word document. It's seeing a bunch of headers, and it says, oh, we think that heading 1s are chapter titles, so let's bring that in as a chapter. And we'll import this. And now this Word document is editable in Pressbooks here. So if I come down and I say, oh, let's look at this chapter. This was a Word document. Now it's a Pressbooks chapter that has a heading, a second level heading. This next chapter has an example of a code block. It brought in email addresses and links. It brought in some math notation. This is math ML. It brought in footnotes. It brought in block quotes, text boxes. I want to take from a Word document and turn in Pressbooks. There's a storm here. Sorry, stuff's falling over.
You're freezing from time to time.
Oh dear. Okay. I probably have too much going on the screen. There's a major weather event happening at my home right now, so it might be my internet connections going out. So, and that's sort of how we would do the import stuff. Hopefully that was more or less clear, but Liz can clean up for me if I was breaking up too badly.
I think we heard everything. I just thought it might go further. Okay, great.
So Liz, I think Josh had a question about how to get the LTI.
Oh, sure. And actually, your demo made me remember that I should also show what that looks like. So this is like a trial instance of Canvas that I set up for myself, and I connected it with the LTI integration to Pressbooks, and then I took in a book using the same method, still showed you with the exception that it came in with the LTI links as opposed to the web links. And as you'll see, Canvas broke, the parts became modules, and then all of the front and back matter and chapters became pages within those. And then what I was able to do is I was able to add things from Canvas itself. So I added in Canvas a quiz. And of course, you could also do this type of thing around the pages that are created by the web links as well. So I've interspersed now, I've used this Open Textbooks as the spine of my course, and now I've interspersed other activities around it. And the difference when you pull up one of these is that navigation from Pressbooks, it's a little less like an embedded window, and it's more native to the actual screen. Another thing that happens if you have a hypothesis enabled on the book, which in this case I do, if there were annotations on this book, you could then begin to read those annotations on top of the book as another layer, all while staying inside the LMS. So that would keep you from popping out. As Steele mentioned, the instance that you have is a free demo trial instance, so it won't have this feature, but this feature is something available on Gold plans for individual institutions, and we're certainly happy to talk with you about that after the call. I'm going to close out of this window for a moment. I also wanted to show just a few of the interactive elements that I don't think we've shown yet today, just kind of to inspire you as to what's possible. I want to show this Portuguese textbook again. What they did was really interesting. What they've done is they've structured the book where there's a lesson followed by a dialogue, and then a lesson followed by a dialogue. So looking at their dialogue, what they've done is they've inserted in Pressbooks an audio file, and it's essentially a dialogue that you can listen to. And then they've also typed out what the dialogue says, so you could read it as well. And then they have a practice where you can then test your understanding of what was said in the dialogue to make sure that you heard it correctly. And then they have some other exercises. And these exercises are created in a tool called H5P, which is a plugin that's available through Pressbooks and that you can use in that way. And I'll give you just a quick sense of how to do that. Here I have a book that has this. I'm going to go to a book that has this enabled. And this is a choice you can make on a per book level. Again, do you want to do this? If so, you can turn it on. And so here there's about 40 different types of interactives and exercises I could choose from in H5P. So I am just going to choose the multiple choice one. But there are cool things like drag the words, fill in the blanks, flashcards, different things and possibilities. So this would be your
and Liz,
metadata.
just
yes.
Real briefly, if you scroll up just a little bit, you'll notice that Liz selected the multiple choice type, and at the top there it has a little, oh, go ahead. No, that was fine what you had there.
Okay.
Go back and pick multiple choice. Oh, there we go. There's a little link that says tutorial and a link that says example. So many of the H5P activities, the first time you make it, you might want to see an example of what this will look like when it's finished, or a tutorial for how to build it. So they have little help links built in. So as you're starting to make one, you can do it. You can copy from other activities too, or import them into Pressbooks because they're open. These are open source typically, and openly licensed themselves.
Yes, and they are very easy to create. You'll see I just filled in a demo H5P there. It generates a shortcode that then I can take into any chapter. There are ways to do this from within a chapter as well. So there are many ways to do this in Pressbooks. This is just the way that makes sense to me and my workflow. But say I want to insert my H5P here, I just insert that shortcode, press save. And then when I preview it, that will appear. And of course, this is kind of a boring multiple choice question, but you could make this quite exciting. A good example, I guess I have one implemented here that is an actual interactive. In this chapter, there are a number of bullet points that sort of define some terms. This was created before the glossary capability actually existed. But if you scroll down to after the chapter, these terms, there are some little quizzes based on these terms. And what you would do here is you can drag the words and then check your knowledge to see if you got that right. You can also take questions that are set up here, and you can kind of see how that works. If you get it wrong, you can retry the question. So it's just kind of a nice way to make your book less of a text object and more of a two-way interactive experience for those students. One other thing I really like is the text box feature, and I use this a lot. I'll just go to organize. There is a chapter where this is set up to give you an example. We have some text boxes, many text boxes that I've created here, and I didn't have to do any coding. I didn't have to customize the colors or the backgrounds or the style of any of these. These are some pre-built text boxes you can use and then insert your own text into. And when you want to do that, you just go into the visual editor and let me find a place to put my cursor. Here we go. And then all I have to do is just choose a text box to add here. And of course I can customize all of the text in these. And then I save my changes. And these are also customizable. You can customize the colors for these in those theme options I showed you earlier. Steele, can you think of anything I haven't shown?
Yes, but actually there's a couple of questions in the chat we might want to take. So
yes,
Josh was asking about the integrations, and so I answered, he said, is integrations only available in Gold or some plan? And I said, yes. The LTI provider plugin, which is what we call it,
yes,
is available on Gold networks. It requires additional configuration and integration with your LMS, but we do make that part of our Gold plans or above. The other thing to note, someone asked about H5P and whether it was accessible, those activities are accessible. So I provided a link in the chat to H5P's documentation of the accessibility of various content types. So many of the content types are fully accessible with WCAG 2.0 AA. If the actual activity itself will vary based on what the author does or doesn't do. So like, if you don't put an alt tag in as an author, you're doing something bad and it won't be accessible. But if you do put an alt tag in, then yes, it should be accessible. A similar thing is kind of true for Pressbooks itself. So we have a VPAT, which is an accessibility statement. The authoring platform of the tool itself has been tested and is compliant with WCAG 2.0 A and AA guidelines and standards. But the content that people make with Pressbooks, if they follow good accessibility guidelines, will be accessible. If they don't, then there may be accessibility problems. We can share some links for how to, some advice. We have some advice in our guide, and there's also a really great guide made by BC Campus that Liz just linked to. That's some advice and guidance for content creators. They use Pressbooks to publish this guide, and so there's a lot of Pressbooks specific things in the guide that are helpful. Josh also said, is only plugin, sorry, can you, I'm not reading this question right. So
are you asking if the only math plugin available is Quick LaTeX? I don't know if you want to talk about math at all, Steele?
Sure. There was also a private question that was sent to me, and that was, what does H5P look like in the printable exports? So let's find a book. Actually, let me show you. So I need to share my screen. So when I say it, let me share it. Okay. So here is an example. This was a great book, an open book that my former grad student in Wisconsin, Naomi Salmon, made. It's a source book that shows a whole bunch of examples for how you can build interactivity into a book. So for example, She's showing some ideas for building a multiple choice quiz and then how to build it and how to, so she's like walking through how you could do multiple choice effectively. In the next chapter, she's talking about other things. It's a cool book with a lot of different H5P activities in it. She also made this book fully available as a PDF download. So let's download this print PDF and let's look at it. That's a little bit of a big file, so it'll take me 10 seconds or so. What will happen, and we will do the same thing for video or for other interactive components that can't be included. When we come to an H5P activity, here you'll see one, there'll be a little box that says an interactive or media element has been excluded from this version of the text. You can view it online and it will give you the link. So if you click this link, oops, that link broke for some reason, but typically the link will take you to the chapter where the activity is. And so it'll tell the reader in the PDF version, there was an accessible, or there was an interactive component here, here's where you can find it. I think that was the question so that Jennifer asked. Josh, I'm not quite sure about the plugin question, but I think I can at least talk about different plugins that are available. And then Amber asked, let's ask this one first. Amber said, if we need some individual assistance with our discipline texts, how might we get that help? And I would say that's a question probably for Michelle, who's on this call, or others at ASCCC. I don't know what their plan is for providing help to individual content creators, whether that's at their institutional level or I don't know the answer to that. Michelle, do you want to weigh in, or should we?
Actually, I think I can. I'll answer that question. This is Suzanne Joachim. I'm one of the OERI regional leads, and for anyone that is creating content through the Academic Senate's OER initiative, we will provide help. So you want to reach out to your campus liaison or your regional lead, and we will provide you that help.
Okay. So, okay, Josh clarified the question. And Liz is trying to clarify that one again. Let me show you, I'm still sharing my screen. So I'm going to show you an example of a book that we cloned. This is like a standard PressbooksEDU network will have a number of additional plugins that aren't available on the general Pressbooks.com. So Pressbooks.com was built as like a self-service tool for self-published authors. It's not really built with teachers and educators in mind, but the PressbooksEDU networks have a number of other features that don't exist there. So for example, here's my plugin list, and you'll see there's an anti-spam plugin that you can use to block comments. Most people don't allow comments, but that's one of them. Another plugin that's available there is H5P. Hypothesis will be already activated, and I'll show that in a second. We have a plugin that allows you to, it's called Parse Down Party, our developer wrote it, but it allows you to edit using something called Markdown. Markdown is a simplified HTML structure. If you know what Markdown is, you may know that you like it and you want to use it. If you don't know what Markdown is, you probably won't use the plugin. But it's the kind of thing that powers like Wikipedia editing and other things like that. Another plugin available is called Table Press. I can show you that one briefly. And then the last one is WP Quick LaTeX for math notation. So H5P, Liz already showed you. Table Press lets you build interactive tables. So you can import from a CSV file, or I'm just going to create a table very quickly here for you. Demo table, I'm a test table. Let's make, I don't know, 4 rows. I don't know how to type. 4 rows and 4 columns, or 3 columns. That's fine. So what it'll do is it'll create a little table, and then I'll populate it, and I'll say name, number of books, favorite color. So the name, Liz. Liz has 74 books, and Liz, your favorite color?
Let's say red.
Okay, great. I have 171. I have pink, and we'll say Josh, and he's got 19 books, and favorite color is green. And then there's a bunch of other kind of complicated, not complicated, but powerful settings that you can use or not use. We'll show the table name, the table description. I'm just going to save this change, and I've created a dynamic table. So this table could be inserted anywhere I want in the book by copying its shortcode, or the shortcode here. So I'm going to come back to my book organization tool. Let's just put it in this chapter just for fun. And here's where the table is going to go. Now when I preview this chapter, you'll see there's an interactive table that can be sorted and filtered. I could have lots and lots of tables and entries, and I could say, oh, I only want to see fields that have the letter E in them. That's all of them. Only the letter I, or only the word green. So it's a nice kind of way to display tabular information in a more dynamic, filterable way. When I produce an export here, this table will just become a flat table. It won't have the interaction anymore, but the tabular content will still be there. The last thing I wanted to show is what Liz was talking about with the annotation tool. It's called Hypothesis, and we're really close to time, so I'll try to be very quick. Hypothesis allows you to do social annotation with your students. I'm very excited about it. I love it. I use it all the time. This was when I was teaching a literature course. I teach this poem, and you'll see there's a bunch of these highlights. These highlights are annotations, and in the annotation layer, you can have things like biography about Lorraine Niedecker. You could have a link. You could have an image, the cover of the book. You could have another image, a historical marker, and someone could reply to this. A student could say, here's a YouTube video I found of people cooking and eating the pawpaw fruit, and someone else finds a recipe, and someone else includes audio. This is the poet reading a poem. All of this stuff can live in the annotation layer, and it can be a public layer so that anyone in the world can read this and write to it, or I can make a private group that's just for my English class. These can exist on the same text at the same time. These annotations are different. This is my private layer, and students can reply to it, and I can send them individual links to the actual annotation so I can point them to part of the text. All of this stuff we think is really exciting for teaching and learning. Hopefully you got a sense for some of what's possible and feel excited to get started yourself. A lot of this information is covered in our general guide and in our YouTube videos, and we expect that you'll probably dig in and have lots more questions once you start playing with it.
Yes, and we do plan to do a few more webinars in the coming months. So this is kind of a level 1 introduction, and there will be more opportunities to go deeper as well. I do see one last question from Amber about graphs for economics in Hypothesis. Do they all have to be pictures? Could you insert a graph?
Yeah. So there's not really like a great graph builder tool, but if you built a graph elsewhere or we're displaying it, I think there is a graph building tool in H5P. So you could make an H5P graph and embed that there. Or if you built, like if you were to say visualize something in R or some other program where you have a graph, you could either take an image and put it into your text, or in some cases you could embed a dynamic graph. I'm getting a little bit in the weeds there, but yeah, I've seen people do things like that, Amber. I don't know if we have time, but we don't have time, but I could show you a couple of examples maybe another time.
Yes.
Oh, wow. Thanks, Irma.
Great. Yeah, so I know we're at time. If anyone has any last questions they'd like us to address, like we can stay on the line a little longer. Otherwise, thank you for joining us today. We really are excited to meet you, and we look forward to seeing what you're going to do on Pressbooks.
Thank you so much for making the time to share everything with all these folks that are clearly interested in Pressbooks. So thank you.
Yeah, we're really excited to see what open content people make, and excited for it to be shared in the broader world to improve education everywhere.